Hello everyone, happy Friday. I come to you today with a Friday Reads video, kind of a catch-up, what I'm currently reading, and then also a couple books that I've finished over the course of the last week or so. I have to admit I've been in kind of a reading slump, excuse me, um, and have struggled to figure out what it is that I want to read. I really wanted to start reading my books for October, but then at the same time, I also had some other books I really need to be finishing, and so I don't know. I haven't read nearly as much here lately as I normally would. I do think that the books I'm currently reading, though, are the books that I actually want to be reading at the moment. And maybe I'm finally pulling myself out of this weird reading funk that I've been in. I do want to talk about two books that I read and finished this past week. The first one is my third book for the ShakeTube event that was going on all this month on BookTube, and that is Will and the World, How Shakespeare Became Shakespeare by Stephen Greenblatt. This is a nonfiction book that is part biography, part look into the writing of Shakespeare. And so it talks about Shakespeare's childhood, and then when he grows up and moves to London, and his family and his relationship with Anne, his wife, and their kids. And then it also looks into his plays and how parts of those plays were inspired by different events that happened around during the course of his life. And this was really fascinating because not only did you learn about Shakespeare, but you also learned about various events that were happening during the time that he was alive. And there were some of them that I already knew about, but there were others that I wasn't as up to date on. So that part was interesting, and then also the more in-depth look at his plays and some of the things that are included in his plays and what the inspiration behind that might be was also interesting as well. So I really enjoyed this, and I actually managed to read all three of the books that I had intended for ShakeTube, which I am really proud of myself for. I read The Winter's Tale by Shakespeare, and then I read a retelling of The Winter's Tale by Jeanette Winterson called The Gap of Time. And then my nonfiction book was Will and the World. And so I finished all my goals for ShakeTube. So I can check that off my list as something that I actually managed to accomplish in terms of my reading life in the month of September. So the other book then is also a nonfiction book that I finished this week. And that is one I just showed on my channel not too long ago that I'd gotten in the mail. And that is Women in the Dark, Female Photographers in the U.S., 1850 to 1900 by Catherine Manthorn. And this book is exactly what it says in the subtitle. It takes a look at female photographers over the course of this 50-year time period in the U.S. And so it's not just to look at the women photographers themselves, but also sort of a history of the different types of photography that were coming into vogue at that time. So it starts out with it. Excuse me, gosh. It starts out with a chapter on the photographic techniques and who the important women were that did those techniques. And then it goes into the Civil War era, and it ends with a chapter on women photographers during the women's movement, or the women's suffrage movement. So this was just a really interesting book. It includes a lot of copies of pictures that were taken by women during various time periods, and discusses the methods that were used and how these women came to be photographers and how they came to be sort of well-known women in the area of photography. Not all of them were as well-known as others, but they all had a part to play in women being in the photography profession. So this was really fascinating, and since photography is one of my favorite hobbies these days outside of reading, this was a very enjoyable read for me. Not only to know more about female photographers I never would have heard of otherwise, but also to learn more about how photography started and the different types of ways that photos were created in the 1850s through the 1900s. So, yes, I really enjoyed this book as well. Alright, so moving on to what I'm currently reading. I have a couple books that I am reading from my library. The first one of those is How to Argue with a Racist, What Our Genes Do and Don't Say About Human Difference by Adam Rutherford. Adam Rutherford actually wrote one of my favorite nonfiction books, which is, what is it called? I don't have it over here. A Brief History of Everyone Who Ever Lived. Jeez, it's right here. Anyway, so he wrote that book, which I really loved. It talks about genetics and how our ancestors share various genes and what they don't share and how we have evolved and all of that sort of thing. So that was really interesting, and it was one of my favorite nonfiction books of 2018, and still a really up there book for me. Anyway, this book talks about genetics in terms of race and what our genes do and do not say about human difference in terms of race. And I'm still reading the first chapter in this book, which is talking about skin pigmentation and how skin pigmentation is a thing within our bodies, essentially. Anyway, some of this I already know from reading previous books about genetics, but some of it I don't know. So, yeah, this has been an interesting read. I'll be curious to see what he discusses in future chapters. I think some of this will be a review for me, but that's okay. I am enjoying this nonetheless, and I feel like this is an important book, given our current political climate and just current time frame in general, because a lot of people just do not understand that race was sort of a socially constructed concept. And so, yeah, this is an important book. If you're interested at all in genetics and then also in race, this might be a book you want to pick up. The other book that I am currently reading is Abraham Lincoln by Carl Sandburg. This is a dual volume of both the Prairie Years and the War Years in a one-volume edition. It doesn't have a dust jacket. It's old and kind of beat up. This is basically a biography of Abraham Lincoln that Carl Sandburg wrote. It was published in 1954, I guess. It looks like it's had several different printings, but the most recent one is in 1954. And so I'm still in the Prairie Years of Lincoln's life at this point, and we're getting slowly into the Civil War. But anyway, this has been interesting. I'm taking it really slowly because there's a lot of information in here, but I really do like Carl Sandburg's writing style in this. I feel like it's not as dry as some other biographies can be, and granted, plenty of biographies aren't dry, but this one is definitely, in my opinion, even less so. It reads more like a story than it does a biography, which I really like. For those of you who aren't aware, Carl Sandburg is also a poet, and I just recently bought a collection of his poetry as well. So, yeah, this has been interesting to read, and to learn more about Abraham Lincoln as a historical figure. And then I have two books that I started reading to sort of cure my my longing to start reading Victorian literature. The first one is a biography of the wife of a Victorian author. It wasn't written in the Victorian period, but it is about someone who was alive in the Victorian period and who wrote Victorian, or was married to someone who wrote Victorian literature. And so that is The True History of the First Mrs. Meredith and Other Lesser Lives by Diane Johnson. This was a New York Review of Books. I am part of the New York Review of Books Classics Book Club, and this was the July 2020 book club selection. And Mrs. Meredith, who is the main person who is being talked about in this book, she was married to George Meredith, who wrote books like The Egoist and other books during the Victorian period. And so this book is looking at her life, because so much of the time it's always the male writers and figures that are focused on. And so with this book, Diane Johnson is looking at Mrs. Meredith and her life, and then also the lives of other people who were connected to her. So it's looking not only at a famous Victorian writer, but at people who were also even more interesting sometimes and more likable than the life of the Victorian writer. So it's been really interesting to read so far. It's written in a vastly different style than you would think of as a normal biography would be, which is something I really enjoy. And there are a lot of other famous historical writers in here that are discussed, like Mary Shelley, Mary Wollstonecraft, Byron, all of those people as well. So this has been a lot of fun to read. I'm really enjoying this. And then last night, I decided to pick up Aurora Leah by Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And this is a book told in verse. And Aurora Leah is the main character in this book. However, there are other people included, but she is the main focus, and it is basically about her growing up and her opinions on various things, like art, love, God, the women question, all of those things. So it's been really interesting to read. I'm actually really, really loving this because it's so different from a lot of the other things I've read. And also Aurora Leah, the character in this book, is far more progressive as a woman than a lot of other females of her time. She's an avid reader. She really loves books. And so, yeah, this has really been just a treasure to read so far because of the things that it examines, and then also Aurora Leah as a character. So, yeah, really, really enjoying this as well. And I'm already on book 2. I hope to finish this before Victober actually officially starts, so I can read the other books on my TBR for Victober. And then the last book that I'm reading is an advanced reader copy that's on my Kindle or my phone, so I don't have anything to show you, but it is Sarah Smarsh's new book, She Came By It Naturally, which is about Dolly Parton and the songs she wrote and the women who inspired them. Heartland is one of my favorite books ever that Sarah Smarsh wrote and published back in 2018, and so reading this book, reading her new book has been a joy as well. She Came By It Naturally comes out in October. I think October 13th is the date. So I'm trying to read it before it officially comes out so that I can write a review for NetGalley. And yeah, those are the books that I am currently reading, and a couple books that I actually finished over the course of last week. I'm looking forward to my weekend. I do have grading to do. My first round of essays came in, but otherwise I think it should be a fairly low-key, relaxing weekend where hopefully I can get some reading done in addition to grading. I don't have to get everything graded this weekend, so it's pretty low pressure. I still have another week before I really have to get everything graded. So, yeah, let me know in the comments what you are currently reading, or if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them, and I will talk to you again soon. Thanks, BookTube!